Joining us now is Jonathan Conricus, former IDF spokesperson and FDD senior fellow, and Megan Mobbs, director of the Center for American Safety and Security and at the Independent Women's Forum. Thank you both for being here. So, Megan, of course, it's nothing new that Iran has been, calls for death to America, but we are getting new information tonight about additional plots that they have to try and assassinate the president.
That's exactly right. And here's another demonstration of how Israel is such a fantastic ally to us, because it was their information that they provided directly to us that this assassination attempt was possible. And as you stated earlier, I always want us to act out of an abundance of caution in order to protect the president. But once again, we are seeing clearly here that the regime and that the Iranian theocratic regime is not going to stand down, and they're going to continue to rain terror as long as possible. And this is why I'm exactly where the president is, and we just have to get the job done.
Yeah, absolutely. Jonathan, it's no surprise that the U.S. and Israel are sharing intelligence like this. After all, Israel is a great ally. They are our friends. They want to make sure that the president of the United States is safe and free from these threats. But what does this say about Iran's capabilities, that they can still issue these threats when we're supposed to be in a ceasefire? The memorandum of understanding has been on the table. What does that say about where the regime is in terms of their power?
Well, I think it's a question about the IRGC, because we have to distinguish between the IRGC and the entire state of Iran. And the IRGC is a state within a state with its separate budget, with a very extremist interpretation of a worldview. And for many years, they have been dreaming about and trying to assassinate President Trump before Qasem Soleimani, but definitely after President Trump in his first term took care of that very important terrorist and did it exceedingly well. But it tells you where the direction is. It tells you what the mindset of those who currently lead the Islamic Republic of Iran, that they're not backing down, that they are indeed doubling down on intentions to try to kill President Trump and most likely to continue fighting in the region.
So, Megan, while all of that is going on, there are still, negotiations. An official told NewsNation tonight that despite Iran's ongoing terrorism, that technical negotiations are continuing. To your point earlier, should these negotiations be over at some point and military strikes resume at a higher level than we're seeing right now?
I think yes. And quite frankly, I do think that's where the president is. And I would say that this memorandum of understanding is quite frankly a memorandum of misunderstanding by everyone, because clearly they weren't honoring it at all whatsoever. And so the president's decision to aggressively re-engage and demonstrate that our strength is going to take precedence and we're going to achieve our end states is exactly where we need to be. I'm fine with diplomacy and I'm fine with talking, but there is a point where you have to say no more talking. You're not meeting the letter of understanding of what we discussed, and we're going to have to take further action. The president seems to be following his instincts there and allowing basically that to take charge and dictate the next steps. And that's where I want us to be, is we're dictating the next steps, not having them dictated to us.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Jonathan, President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke today and agreed to continue with close coordination across what they called various arenas. Does that include strikes on Iranian Hezbollah in Lebanon, or do you feel like Israel has now been given the ability to handle that problem themselves without U.S. interference? And what does it mean if the U.S. were to go back to additional and overwhelming military strikes in Iran? Do you think that Israel would join in to help finish that job?
Yeah, the second part of the question, that's a definite yes. I think any opportunity that would open for Israel to actually defeat the Iranian regime, apply heavy military pressure on that regime, I think it's an opportunity that Israel would very likely want to take, because that would mean really a seismic shift for the well-being of Israelis. It would mean that the number one state supporter of terrorism in the region would be done, and then a lot of Israelis would wake up to a totally different environment with fewer terrorists trying to kill them. So I think that would be the case. And I don't think that Israel is now going to get, like a carte blanche and to do whatever we need to do against Hezbollah in Lebanon, because I think we're still in a sensitive stage. And I understand that the Americans prioritize Hormuz over Lebanon. And I don't think that Israel is going to be allowed to do what's necessary quite yet. If the Iranians continue to violate and act as they have so far, maybe that will bring about the change with regards to Hezbollah in Lebanon, and we'll see both fronts open up and maybe Israel do what needs to get done.
You know, Megan, the big question since the beginning of this, and really always with the Iranian problem, is whether you could, take out the nuclear program, attack the IRGC, but not take out the regime completely and get new leadership in order to change the behavior and actually put this problem to rest. Do you think that there is the stomaching, the political will, the strategic patience to move forward with military operations or other means to get to a point where we're dealing with what the president has previously called rational people, but he's decided now that the regime in place is they're just unavailable to actually act in good faith?
I'm always going to be optimistic, Katie. I'm optimistic always about the president, and I'm optimistic about the American people, and quite frankly, their willingness to endure a little bit of pain in order to achieve a decisive end state. I think what Americans don't like is drift. I don't think we like waffling. I think we like decisive action. And while regime change wasn't inherently stated as initial goal of epic fury, I think the reality is becoming very clear that when you have extremists in charge, you're not going to get to a rational end state. I think the president is increasingly recognizing that, and I'm sure that it's going to open up a whole host of policy options that I hope he truly considers in order to get this done for the American people.
Well, we will watch and we shall see what happens in the future. Jonathan Conricus and Megan Mobbs, thank you for joining us. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Katie.